Testing 1, 2, 3. Check 1, 2. We'll explain the sign-up sheets in the meeting, but put the handout there in the middle will be helpful.
So we're going to come in here for the meeting?
Yep, we're going to be right here. Yep.
All right. What?
You sit so far back.
You said you were going to close it?
Okay, I'm going to sit right on the front.
Okay.
Almost up front. Almost up front?
Almost up front.
It's very un-Methodist of you. There you go.
So we're going to have to go in front.
What they call skid row. No, actually, since Rick's hunting trip got canceled, right? So we decided we were sort of going to see the kids, though he wasn't down there already. And so we canceled my trip for Tuesday, and we both of us for Thursday.
Oh, that's right.
So, all right, so we'll leave Thursday morning. Yeah, super early.
So we're where?
Yeah, we're going out to Arkansas. Yep. So we fly in Little Rock, and then Jonathan will come to the side. Yeah.
We'll be there sometime.
If y'all want to come on in, we've got some sign-up sheets there that I'll explain as we get into our meeting, so you don't need to necessarily stop there, but there are handouts there in the middle.
We'll see if that comes through.
That's right. That's right.
To be nosy, what kind of got coming? Are you going to another church?
We'll come home on Monday.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're not here
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah, so not too long, but a little bit, yeah. Just be able to circle around and go see where it is.
Yeah.
We're gonna do on
Yeah.
driving.
Hey, girls had it all. Good.
Yeah, so we'll hopefully.
So we don't have a meeting Wednesday.
Okay.
This is Thanksgiving. Please. So you take care. Okay.
Well, we can consolidate our first.
Here's we shut out Miss Franks. There we go. We've got her figured out.
Oh, yeah.
Is the internet working?
Nope, it's all working today, thankfully.
Okay.
It's on Central. Oh, no, we're in the office. Really slow.
Yeah, we're getting some slow internet stuff. I don't know what's going on. We got gremlins in the internet. What are we gonna do?
Shoot him.
Shoot them? Shoot the gremlins?
This is.
Okay, we are on. Live stream is working. So let me remove something real quick. Remove that real quick. We're going to go ahead and get started here. If you didn't catch it on the way in, there's a handout on the table there in the center aisle. There are also some clipboards there, and we're going to explain those clipboards in just a moment. But if you didn't get one of those handouts, they would be helpful to you. I'm going to spend just a little bit of time explaining some of that. Last week, well, first of all, we want to welcome you and thank you for joining us. A little bit of housekeeping. We've got the online working today, so welcome anybody who's joining us online who may be streaming us. I know that there were folks from our congregation who couldn't be here. There are also people from other congregations who are connected with us in some form or fashion who may check in as well. Just know that this video will be live, so if you here present want to go back and rewatch it, or what did he say about that, you can go back and rewatch that on our YouTube channel or our Facebook page, and they will be up, so if you want to share them with anybody, please feel free to do that. We'll leave those up. Other housekeeping portions. Last week, as we sort of joked at the beginning, our internet went out partially through the worship service and cut off our live stream, and then made it impossible for us to live stream our first town hall meeting, which was unfortunate. I believe we tried to capture it on video, and I have not been able to pull that down yet, but my goal is this week to get that pulled off of our cameras and hopefully edit it up and post it to our YouTube channel. So if you want to see our town hall meeting from last week, or if you missed it, or if you were online and you couldn't participate because our internet was down, you can check that out. The theme of last week's town hall was, how did we get to this point? How did we even get to the point where we're asking about where our future should be? And so that gives some history and had some questions and answers. One of the questions that came about as a result of that town hall last week was, what are some resources that we can turn to learn more about this stuff? And so what I hoped to do is provide you a very easy way for you to find this. We're going to post this on our website when Lisa gets back from the hinterlands from Thanksgiving, so it won't be up this week with the holiday, but as soon as she gets back, we'll have her post it to the website so that you can click through on the links. But I just want to highlight a couple of them for you. On the first page, and I'm sorry you don't have this online, folks, but if you reach out to me at our email address with a request, well, first of all, you can ask any questions that you have if you're online. You can send those to our prayer email address. The address is there at the bottom of the screen, BrightonUMCprayers@gmail.com. Send in any questions there. We'll be able to pick those up live and hopefully be able to respond to them if you get them into us soon enough. But if you would like a digital copy of the handout after the meeting, shoot me an email and I can make that happen pretty easily so you can get a hold of it. But the handout itself, for those of you who are here in person, has a number of boxes with these weird squiggly things that we've grown very accustomed to, these QR codes. I don't know if you're familiar with QR codes, but I try to make it as easy for you to find this stuff as possible. Rather than try to repeat it and create a whole document full of all sorts of stuff, I try to point you in the direction of some things that will be helpful. The first box you'll see there is the Brighton United Methodist Church YouTube page. You may have navigated to that, especially if you're an online person. You may have navigated to that in the past. But we created a playlist specifically for the denominational discussions that we're having right now. Right now there are 2 videos there. As we discover more, we will put them in that playlist. Thank you. Great fart. We'll put them in that playlist so that you can go back and find them, and you won't have to go searching the internet to find them. You'll just be able to go right to that playlist on our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to see them. Right now there are 2 up there. The first is a town hall meeting that was presented by the Tri-Lakes United Methodist Church in Monument, Colorado. And they invited a member of the cabinet from the Mountain Sky Conference, Reverend Jeff Rainwater, who has been he was district superintendent of Wyoming district for a number of years, and is now, I'm going to mess up his title, so sorry, Jeff, if you're watching. He's in charge of congregational vitality, renewing of churches and the starting of new churches in our conference. And he was also dean of the cabinet for a time. These are the people who appoint the pastors to be at the churches in our conference. And he came out to Tri-Lakes and presented sort of a vision for what the United Methodist Church will look like in the future, to kind of give people a sense of that. And he took some time to really answer a lot of their questions about lots of different things. So there's a pretty succinct presentation from him, and then there's an extended period of questions and answers on that video. So that's one video. That's the Tri-Lakes video. The other video that's up there is of Reverend Dr. Jeff Greenway. Jeff Greenway was, in the past, he's been a pastor for decades, but he spent some time as the president of the Asbury Theological Seminary in Kentucky, and which trains more United Methodist pastors than any other seminary in the world. He pastors a church in Ohio right now, and he was the first chairperson of the Wesleyan Covenant Association, and his presentation is, it's brief, it's like 12 or 13 minutes, something like that, and it's top 10 reasons you might consider joining the Global Methodist Church, and we'll get into what that is in just a minute. He's a great guy. He's very well-spoken and has a very, I think, helpful summary of maybe some of the things that would be attractive about the Global Methodist Church, should we choose to go in that direction. So that would be another possibility for you there. And as we discover more videos, we'll put them up there. Now, here's the cool thing about it. There's a link there, but I noticed if you press the paper, you don't go anywhere. And so what I tried to do, if you have a cell phone, what you should be able to do is open up your camera and hover it over that weird box to the right of that description. And you should be able to tap on that. I know how it works on Apple, so if it works differently on Android, please help me. But you can tap on that, and it will take you to that website. So you don't have to go punching in, but you can punch in all those fun characters if you're interested. Like I said, we're going to try and post a digital version so that you can just click the link through if you want. But if you want to look at them now on your phone or at home, you can pull them up easily by utilizing that QR code there. Okay, that make sense?
Uh-huh.
Great. I don't know if you've been out to eat recently, but a lot of restaurants have done away with menus. So you get there and there's some QR code taped to the table and you have to scan it, and then you're like trying to blow up the menu, and so you can see it. It's kind of the same concept, but you can basically have it link, that code box links to that website. So it'll take you directly there. Some of the other websites we have, the Global Methodist Church, which we'll be talking about here in a moment. They have a full web page, but I took you to the FAQ page, the Frequently Asked Questions page. You can go through and click and look at those frequently asked questions and their answers on their website, but then you're already on their website, so you can go surfing around if you want more information there. There's lots there. Did the same thing for the Western jurisdiction. That is the 7-layer cake of United Methodism. There's the local church, that's you all, and then we're a part of a district, which is sort of our local region. Then that is part of a larger annual conference, and that annual conference is a bigger region, and then that conference is part of a jurisdiction. There's no quiz, I promise. The Western jurisdiction, they elect bishops. They're the body that elects bishops for their region. And they recently met, so there's some fresh news up on their website, things about resolutions that they passed, descriptions of bishops and all the candidates they were considering. They elected 3 new bishops about 3 weeks ago that will start in January. And so there's a lot of information there. If you want to kind of know where at least the Western jurisdiction lives when it comes to the United Methodist Church and its future, that would be a good place to get some information. There was a good article that referenced the term big tent from the president of the WCA, The WCA is the Wesleyan Covenant Association. They were the organization that formed in 2016. I'm a member of the WCA, and they have been working to create a proposed book of doctrines and disciplines for the new Global Methodist Church. Their charge was to reform the United Methodist Church, and if not able to do so, to prepare for the establishment of a new denomination. And so they did a lot of work there. Jay Farrell is their recently elected president of the WCA, and he wrote this. We talked a lot about the Methodist conception when we became United Methodist as sort of the big tent that could include a lot of different and diverse theological perspectives. And he talks about how that experiment has sort of failed. So, and that also gives a summary of the Episcopal elections that happened not just in the West but across the country 3 weeks ago. So that's and that also takes you to the WCA website, so you can poke around there and see what's there. There's also the Mountain Sky Conference website. This link will particularly take you to the process a church would use to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church, which would be a first step if we chose to do that. And so you can see what steps would be involved if we chose to attempt to go in a different direction. But it also lands you on the Mountain Sky Conference website, so you can poke around there and see if there's lots of news and information about our Mountain Sky Conference. Then there's another website called the Christmas Covenant website. That sounds very festive as we head into Advent, but it's really the proposed direction for the United Methodist Church post General Conference in a year and a half or so. And we'll get into that, but there's more information about what's being specifically proposed there, if you want to poke around there. And then there's an article, the last one is an article that we'll talk about from the protocol on, let's see if we get it wrong, the Protocol for Reconciliation and Grace Through Separation that was proposed. We talked about this last week in January of 2020, and would have been properly before the General Conference later that year in May of that year, and then got postponed, as we talked about last week. There were signers from all corners of the spectrum onto that protocol. There were traditionalists, there were progressives, there were centrists, there were bishops who would all sign on to that protocol. And this link here will take you to the formal withdrawal of most of the centrist and progressive groups. They've rescinded their support for that ahead of the 2024 General Conference. So that gives you some information to kind of so that you can research some stuff on your own. And I'm sure there are more, and we'll see if we can add to this as we go along, but hopefully that will give you some resources on both sides of this conversation to kind of poke around and find your way to more information if you'd like. And of course, I can always help fill in any blanks or answer any questions along the way as well. So before we jump into the purpose of our gathering, that was all a lot of housekeeping, I apologize for all that, but why don't we just start with a moment of prayer. Can we pray? Gracious and loving God, we pray that you would be present with us as we discern the future of our congregation. But we pray most of all that whatever we do and however we do it, it would be done to your glory and that it would be done in alignment with your Holy Spirit. Lord, guide us in our conversations, guide us in our path, that we might truly glorify you in all that we do. Bless this, your church, as we seek to serve you in this community of faith. Lord, bless us all in our understanding and our compassion for one another as we have difficult conversations. I pray these things in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. Amen. Okay. So a couple of things. Today's gathering is really for the purpose of comparing and contrasting two potential futures for our congregation. I will fully admit from the outset that there are probably more questions about the future in either path than there are answers. So we don't have firm, this is how it's absolutely going to be forever and all time. But we do have some clues that indicate to us a little bit about where things are going to go, depending on which path we decide. So first of all, a recognition that we do have a decision to make, and that not making a decision is every bit as much as making a decision. So we can, as it were, we can stay with our current affiliation in the United Methodist Church. That's the affiliation that we've had since 1968, and before it, the Methodist Church and the Methodist Episcopal Church going back to 1896. So we have been a church in this community for a long time. We've always been Methodist, and by God's grace, we'll remain some form of Methodist for sure. But that strain of Methodism, we could stick with that sort of framework, continue with the United Methodist Church into the future, and embrace that boldly and live into that together. But we're also afforded an opportunity, an option to maybe choose a different path. The first step to that, as I mentioned, would be disaffiliating from the United Methodist Church, which is not an easy thing to do, as we talked about last week. There's a lot of things that hold us together as a denomination and individual churches within it. So it's not an easy thing to do, but because of a provision that was passed in 2019, there is a paragraph in the discipline, 2553, that was inserted in February of 2019, and that will sunset in December 31st of 2023. So it will sunset next December, just a little more than a year from now. So the window to take advantage of that paragraph and disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church is a limited one. We basically have to have everything done, turned in, votes had by the end of next year if we decided to do that. And the timeline is even a little bit tighter than that, because actually the last vote we need is the vote of the annual conference. The Mountain Sky Conference would have to vote and has to vote on the disaffiliation of any congregation. And their next and only scheduled meeting for 2023 now is in June. So we might have till the end of next year, but really we have to have everything sort of sorted out by June, if that's what we wanted to do, which is why we're kind of rushing us through this process of information and discernment, trying to get as much information in your hands so that we can make as informed decision as possible. So the purpose of our gathering today is really to compare and contrast those two potential futures, and then so that we can decide how we'd like to go. So disaffiliating from the UMC does not guarantee that we would then become a part of the Global Methodist Church. That would be something we would have to initiate ourselves. So we could leave the UMC and be an independent church, but I have my reasons, and I would love to go into that, with anybody who's curious, but I would highly recommend that not be the option. Independence is not the nature of Methodism, and so connectedness is really a part of that. So I think being connected to a larger denomination will have great benefits for the kingdom of God in this congregation, regardless of which denomination you decide to go with. But to give you some idea of where the UMC is and where it might go, currently the United Methodist Church is still operating under its 2016 discipline. We haven't had a full-on general conference since May of 2016 because of the pandemic. It was supposed to meet in 2020 and it got delayed now 3 times to 2024. So we'll be a full 8 years before we have a full general conference again. They did have that special general conference in 2019, and at that special general conference, they reaffirmed the language that is currently in the discipline from 2016, dating all the way back to 1972, and that is that the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching, and that grew in the late 70s and early 80s to be more explicit when it came to the ordination of what are called self-avowed practicing homosexuals. So people can be celibate and be a part of ministry, but self-avowed practicing homosexuals are currently prevented from being clergy, ordained clergy in the United Methodist discipline. And regardless, all United Methodist clergy and all United Methodist congregations are barred from hosting and officiating at same-sex weddings at this point. Those are kind of the 3 pieces that are a part of the current. Those are a part of the current discipline as it is now. And many attempts have been made to change that over the years, but we've been We mentioned last week that those values were reaffirmed in the discipline at the 2019 Special General Conference by a vote of about 53% to 47%. So it's not a huge majority, but it is a majority of United Methodists worldwide affirm what's in the discipline. That being said, that doesn't always have to be the case, and there were legislative efforts to change that were going to come before the General Conference in 2020. There were actually efforts in 2016 that sought to strengthen that, and we talked last week about the need for accountability, that though the language is there in the discipline, you might have noticed that our bishop is married to another woman, and the Western jurisdiction just elected a man who is married to another man, to be bishop now over the California-Nevada conference. No, he's going to the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Idaho conferences in January. So you might think, well, why is that? Well, that's because there's no way to really enforce what's in the discipline. So we have rules and no way to enforce them. We mentioned at that 2019 General Conference there was a call to either do away with the rules or find a way to enforce them. And we managed to affirm the rules and avoid finding ways to enforce them. So we're kind of in the same boat we've been in for many decades now. So where does that leave us with the United Methodist Church? Where is that going to go? You may have heard, either by news, if you're plugged into this, some of this stuff has risen to national or local news agencies. If you follow the United Methodist news in any depth, you may have heard about some of this. But there has been a push since the General Conference was postponed a third time to 2024, and signs are showing that it's very unlikely that any protocol will pass in 2024. Then there have been a lot of traditional churches who have sought to use that paragraph in the discipline to leave the denomination. I tried to get some numbers here. There were several hundred churches that left in Texas. There are like 67 or something that left from Georgia. There were, I believe, somebody just mentioned to me the other day, was it UMIC, the Louisiana conference? I can't remember how many churches left there. Estimates are based on best available data, and nobody really fully knows, but estimates are somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 United Methodist churches will choose to take advantage of the disaffiliation paragraph before it expires at the end of next year, which represents somewhere between 9 and 15% of United Methodist churches, to give you some idea of what that would be.
That's worldwide, right?
Yes, that's worldwide. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so there are churches that are disaffiliating, and those churches are largely traditional churches. And they're taking with them their members who would have voted at annual conference to elect delegates, etc. It has domino effects in the process, essentially. So as more traditionalists leave the denomination, it's more likely that the delegates to annual conferences, and therefore the delegates to general conference, will be leaning more progressive as time goes on. So the estimates by the vote counters that are, these guys are way smarter than I am, I trust they've been right more than they've been wrong. The vote counters, sort of who do this sort of thing, estimate that there will not be the traditional majority that sustained the discipline's language in 2019 will not be there in 2024. That there will be enough loss in the United States from traditionalists that there won't be enough traditionalists from America to partner with the traditionalists from overseas to maintain the current discipline as it is. And you may think, well, why is that a big deal? It would just mean that there could be significant changes to the discipline that have not happened over the course of the last 55 years. Over the course of 2 weeks in 2024, there could be any number of changes to a lot of things to the discipline. That we've kind of been locked in that 53-47-ish range It's varied, depending on the year and the current controversies of the day, but it's been locked in that sort of that the people who make up those differences are different, but it's been locked in that sort of 53-47 range for 40 or 50 years. And if there's suddenly a flip, then that could mean significant changes. So if you think the UMC is just going to stay as it's always been, that's probably not the case. But Jeff in his video, and I want to give him credit, he comes and he sort of lays out a vision that the UMC would be scripturally based, that it would continue to be connected to its Wesleyan heritage, that it would continue to try to support local churches, and it's dedicated to continue in ministry. He does acknowledge in that video, if you go back and watch that video in greater depth, he does acknowledge that there will be efforts, and there'll likely be successful efforts, to remove the language concerning sexuality in the Book of Discipline. So there would be sort of at least an effort to remove the restrictive language, so that the discipline wouldn't explicitly restrict things. But he doesn't claim that the UMC will go on to endorse various things, just that they would remove the restrictions. Essentially what he talks about, and this is what the Christmas covenant is, if you're interested, on the back of your sheet there. The Christmas covenant is a proposal of legislation to the General Conference in 2024 that would seek to basically implement what we talked about last week as the One Church Plan. This would regionalize the Book of Discipline. So right now, this is a lot of in the weeds, so I apologize, but right now the Book of Discipline is only changeable by the General Conference. And there are parts of the discipline that are harder to change than others. We have a constitution and we have the Articles of Religion. Those take enormous consensus worldwide in order to change those. But there are other parts of the discipline that just take a majority at General Conference. And the sexuality material in the discipline falls under that category of stuff that can be changed by a majority at General Conference. So the proposal for the Christmas covenant is to regionalize that. What that means is the Book of Discipline is binding on the United States, but it's voted on by the worldwide church. So all of the churches, all of the conferences outside the U.S. have voice and vote in the changing of the discipline, but when it comes to implementing the discipline in their region, they have some latitude to modify the discipline for their region outside the U.S. So this comes into place in, for example, the Book of Discipline has a lot of very detailed information about what it takes to become ordained and what kind of committees and things we have to have in our church. So our structure is very dictated by the discipline. But some of that structure makes absolutely no sense in a place like sub-Saharan Africa, right? And so African areas can change those portions of the discipline to best suit their ministry context. Follow me? So the proposal is to make the U.S. its own region. So we make the U.S. its own region, so the U.S. will have its own discipline, and then other parts of the world can have their own version of the discipline, and that the United States could then contextualize. So the first step would be to create the United States as an independent region within the United Methodist Church, and then the next move would be to remove that language to allow churches, pastors, and conferences to deal with sexuality in a way that they discern is appropriate for their context. Does that make sense? So that's likely where the UMC would go. It's not entirely clear how fast it would go there. If they could get that done at a general conference in 2024, that's not clear. But that would be the direction that they would head. Likely. Like I said, we're reading tea leaves here and we're trying to do our best. But for example, the Mountain Sky Conference formally voted by like 90% to endorse the Christmas Covenant as an annual conference. The jurisdictional conference that just met and elected bishops, one of the other things they did was affirm and call for the passage of the Christmas Covenant legislation at General Conference. So that seems to be the direction the UMC will head in the near future. So some other things there, regional church. The other piece that's important to know is that the General Conference in 2024 is highly unlikely to renew or replace the disaffiliation provision in paragraph 2553. So right now that paragraph will sunset at the end of 2023, and General Conference will meet in April, May of the next year, 2024. So 5.5, 6 months before General Conference meets, the provision that would allow a church to leave the UMC with its property and be released from the trust clause goes away, and it's not likely to come back. The votes don't seem to be there to reinstate it, and there seems to be a sense among the top leadership in the United Methodist Church right now to move on from disaffiliation after the sunsetting of paragraph 2553. So basically, 2024 isn't likely to give us any sort of better deal, so it makes no sense to wait and see. It really calls for us to make a decision now. If we wanted to leave, now would be the time, because there probably won't be an opportunity later. Okay? So that leaves us with, if we stay with the UMC, that's kind of the direction things might go. If we were to leave the UMC, and as I said, we could go independent, although I would highly recommend against that. Another option would be to affiliate with the Global Methodist Church. Now, the Global Methodist Church is a baby church that has just started, but it starts with a great deal of work and forethought that has gone into it. The Wesleyan Covenant Association, with one of those links there on that handout, the Wesleyan Covenant Association has been working over the past 6 years to create proposals for a potential new denomination. Those are not ensconced in stone as policy yet, but they are available. If you're curious, you can find them on the WCA website and kind of see what's being proposed. A lot of innovative proposals. As Jeff Greenway says, the G is not going to be the UMC 2.0. They tried to take the lessons, the values, and the goods of the Methodist structure and imagine how they might move in more helpful directions moving forward. And he does a better job of casting that vision. So I'll point you in the direction of his YouTube video, but for all the details. But there's a lot there. They proposed a whole book of doctrines and discipline, and they've worked in teams, over 1,000 volunteers, working for no pay at all, to craft an extensive doctrines and discipline. Everything from what we're going to do about church planting to what they want to do about catechism with young and old people, with everything with deployment of pastors, to revitalization of existing churches, to you name it, they've talked about it. And there's proposed policies. Now, like I said, those policies are not in place right now. The Global Methodist Church just launched May 1st of 2022, so just a few months ago, officially. They were waiting in the wings, prepared to launch as the traditional denomination that would be formed by the protocol, if the protocol were passed. But since the protocol hasn't been passed because General Conference has been delayed over and over, it became clear that there needed to be a place for churches to land. And that's why the GMC went ahead and launched. They felt like waiting until 2024 and hoping the protocol passed when it isn't very clear that it would be too late. There were already over 200 churches that had disaffiliated from the United Methodist Church by that point, and so they decided it was time to launch it. Nothing else, just to be able to have a place for those churches to land and connect, so that they didn't sort of drift into the ether. But they also provide an opportunity for us to connect with them should we decide we wanted to go in that direction. And right now they're under the leadership of what's called the Transitional Leadership Transitional Leadership Council. This is a group of traditional leaders that were selected by the WCA and other traditional sort of interest groups as folks to kind of guide in the first year or two before there could be a convening conference. And once there's a convening conference, that will then adopt a book of doctrines and discipline formally, and the church will sort of develop from there, basically. But it's kind of in those early stages of development, kind of in transition right now. But there are some things that we do know about the GMC that will be helpful to you. And Jeff goes into a lot of these as well, but just to give you some highlights on the right-hand side of that first page. First of all, not all churches leaving will join the GMC. Not all churches leaving will join the GMC, but leaving churches will leave the UMC smaller, if you will. It's led by the Transitional Leadership Council, but it won't be official. All of their official policies and doctrines won't be formally adopted until that convening conference. So there's a little bit of a stepping out into a gray zone there. You won't know exactly what you're getting into, but the other advantage would be that you could have a voice in helping form that new thing too. So there's goods and bads there. Convening conference would formalize the doctrines and disciplines, but much is already known. Okay, and the couple of things that might be important to you, the rule in the discipline that holds us in the United Methodist Church, that it's called the trust clause. We talked about this a little bit last week too. The trust clause is a provision in the discipline that says the Mountain Sky Conference, in our case, holds all of our property and assets in trust. So if we decided as a congregation we want to leave the denomination, we could do that at any time, but we would have to walk away from every brick, stone, pencil, dollar in the bank account. We would have to walk away from all of our property and assets and turn those over to the UMC because they're held in trust by the annual local congregations' property and assets are held in trust by the annual conference. So and it's a little bit of a misnomer. You, the congregation, owns the property and everything, but it is held in trust by the UMC through the annual conference. Does that make sense? So there would be no trust clause in the Global Methodist Church. That's already been well established. That there is no plan to have any trust clause in the Global Methodist Church. And that's intentional. They want churches to be collected into a group of the willing in ministry together, not being compelled to because you want to continue to worship in your space. So there'll be no trust clause in the GMC. The bishops in the GMC will be term limited. So right now in the Methodist Church, bishops are elected for life. So they either have to be removed by a judicial process. Yeah, they have to be brought up on charges and removed in a disciplinary way, or retired. Even if they're retired, they're still bishops. So once you're a bishop, unless you surrender your credentials or they're stripped for you for misconduct, you are a bishop for life. In the Global Methodist Church, bishops would be elected for 2, possibly 3 4-year terms. And so they would be elected by the denomination itself, not local jurisdictions. They would also be under accountability to a group of appointed a board that would oversee the discipline for bishops. That would not include bishops. Right now, bishops are in charge of disciplining each other, which makes it really awkward for them, and it makes it very difficult for that to happen in a lot of places. So bishops would be term limited. They would be overseen by an independent board of non-bishops. More input from church on clergy. Anybody ever served on an SPRC? Yeah, yep. Anybody ever had the misfortune of serving on an SPRC during a clergy transition? Yes, some of you were at my clergy transition when I came here many moons ago. The process involves basically receiving a pastor appointed to you. And that actually happens every year. You have known it because I've been annoying you for now going on 13 years. But they just keep sending me back, I don't know. But the point of that is the conference, the bishop specifically, and under the advice of the bishop's cabinet, appoints the pastors to the churches. And the churches have, some say, this conference actually has a bit more of a track record for collaboration than other conferences. But basically what the bishop decides goes. And you can say you don't like the bum. You could call her and say that you don't like me. If she wants to send me here, there's really nothing you can do about it. And that's kind of the way it is. And like I said, it's not very frequent that a bishop in our region has flexed those episcopal muscles, but it can be. And the process is they bring you somebody, and you don't interview them. It's called an introduction. It's a bit of an arranged marriage, in other words. Yeah. I was brought here, and I was introduced to the SPRC, and unless they could come up with some compelling missional reason for me not to come, after having met me for all of an hour and a half, then I was coming. That's how the process works. It has its advantages, but it also has its disadvantages, in that there can be abuses in that system that make it sort of limited in who you can select as your pastor, who you can get as your pastor. You're really limited by who they'll be willing to bring you, essentially. That will not be the case in the GMC. They're looking at a much more collaborative. It will also have its own issues because it will be sort of a modified call system. If anybody ever been a part of a pastor transition in a non-Methodist church, okay? That can be its own set of headaches, where you're searching for weeks and months and maybe even years for a new pastor. The Global Methodist Church seeks to provide a network of potential pastors and to work with local churches to find appropriate clergy, but it will be much more collaborative, and the church will have a much greater say in who comes to be their pastor. And then, finally, the dirty word that no one wants to talk about, and that's not evangelism, it's apportionments. Anybody been on the finance team of a Methodist church, you know, or in a leadership role, you know that apportionments are our term in the Methodist Church, one of them, to refer to, sometimes we soften it by calling it connectional giving. That sounds more polite, doesn't it? Basically, we remit a percentage of our income to the annual conference. And the annual conference submits a portion of that they use a portion of it for their operating expenses, and they submit a portion of that onto the global denomination for the support of the global ministries of the church. And so in the Mountain Sky Conference for the last probably 16 years, 15 years, something like that. It happened shortly after I became a pastor. We switched to a percentage of adjusted gross income. So the Mountain Sky Conference calls upon its churches to provide 13% of its income minus capital campaign, memorial giving, and rent. So our rent from the preschool is excluded from that. Any giving that is done in memorial to someone is not a part of that calculation, and anything given to a capital campaign or to upkeep the building directly is not a part of that. So it's basically what's been put in the offering plate, what's been offered up to the general operating budget of the church. And 13% of that, we report those numbers to the conference, and then we remit 13% of that to the conference, and have done so every year for the last 12 and a half years plus. Since I've been here. There are churches that don't do that. There are churches that do part of that. There are churches that just don't do it at all. And they range from the small and financially struggling all the way up to the very large and heavily indebted. They all have their reasons, but we have chosen to lead by continuing to remit our apportionments every year. So that's 13% of our income. That's around $36,000 this year, give or take, to give you some ballpark numbers. The apportionments for the Global Methodist Church are proposed at 1% for the denomination, and a cap of 5% for the annual conference. I think so. Yeah, I got that right. They're proposing a 1.5% to start with. So annual conferences will start off with 1.5%. If you're doing the math, that's 2.5% to 6.5% instead of 13%. So the idea in the Global Methodist Church is to have a leaner, much less cumbersome denominational structure that will take a lot less to financially support. so that more of that money can stay in the local churches for ministry in our local church. So that's another piece there. So that's kind of the contrast. We've got a UMC that's likely to go in some new directions in the coming years, and we've got a GMC that's going in a different direction. The GMC, to be clear, as a traditional denomination, would affirm the language that's currently in the discipline that we talked about at the beginning. So the Global Methodist Church would affirm that language of human sexuality, and then would cast a vision for a church sort of set up somewhat like this. But it, like I said, is not fully formed and won't be until there's a convening conference. So we could stay with the UMC and morph with however that kind of goes, or we could jump into the GMC and we could have a hand in morphing that in the way it goes. So that's kind of that's the gist, if you will. There's a lot of information out there about both the future of the UMC and the future of the GMC, and you have to be careful who you're reading and what perspective they're bringing to those assessments. You can imagine somebody who's really committed to staying in the UMC might not have the greatest things to say about the GMC, and you might guess that there are people in the GMC who don't have a lot of great things to say about the UMC and where it will go. So I would say go to people in the UMC and see what they're saying about the future of the church. Go to the people at the GMC and see what they're saying about where the future of that denomination will go for the clearest pictures. But just be aware that there's a lot of propaganda out there these days, and I've tried to give you. You can't stay away from the propaganda entirely, but I've tried to give you a variety here of resources that you can go and look at what the different camps are saying. So that's sort of a brief summary of all of that. And I wonder what questions you might have. And so let me pull up my phone so that I can see if anybody has emailed in. Once again, just a reminder, if you're online and you'd like to email a question in, BrightonUMCprayers@gmail.com. The address is there at the bottom of your screen. And you can send those in to that email address, and we'll see if we can address them live. But if you have a question here, I'd love to be able to answer those. Maybe while you're thinking, since I just asked you if you have questions. We've also got some clipboards over here with 4 small group opportunities that will be coming up the week after Thanksgiving. Sorry we can't live stream those for our live stream audience, but the purpose of those is to get you in a smaller group where it's a little more intimate with people from our congregation, and to have conversations about how you feeling, what are you thinking, what are you worried about, what are you excited about, sort of what are you thinking, and what kind of questions you might have in a setting where you don't have the pastor up here, sort of directing attention and everything. So we have 3 families who have opened their homes, and one leader who's going to host here at the church. We've got a host of different times, a couple of evenings, a weekend afternoon, and a weekday morning. So we've got those 4 opportunities there. We are going to limit those sizes and try to allow our leaders to prepare for those meetings ahead of time. So if you would sign up on one of those meetings, we would love to get you into one of those gatherings where you can just sort of process this a little bit more than this is more monologue, information giving. That's more of a processing place, a place for you to kind of take your questions, your concerns, your fears, your excitement, and process those with leaders who kind of know what's been going on, but can also facilitate you guys having a conversation about it. So that's kind of the goal there.
Would you be able to, for the online people, be able to tell them the dates and the times of the small group, and maybe they could email into the prayer email to sign up for one?
Sure, yeah. We won't have virtual options, so if you can get here, there's one Monday the 27th at 6, one Wednesday the 29th at 6. There is one Saturday the 4th of December at 3 o'clock, and then there is one here on Friday the 2nd. Oh, so that's not the 4th. Friday the 3rd. Saturday the 3rd at 3 o'clock, and Friday the 2nd. And we said at 10 o'clock, is that right? Yeah, we get that. So if you're interested, we've got Monday and Wednesday evenings, we've got Saturday afternoon and Friday morning. If you'd like more information and you're online and you can get here in person, let me know. We can get you signed up for one of those. Yeah, Sue.
So do we have to do anything at the church conference on December 14th?
Great question. Sue's asking, are we going to have to do anything for disaffiliation decision at our charge conference that's coming up December 14th? We are not doing anything formal at that charge conference. We are going to take a straw poll, though. The charge conference, if you're not familiar, is the annual gathering of our whole congregation to hear reports and to celebrate the ministries that we've had over the past year, and to make some important decisions that are dictated to us by the discipline that we have to make as a congregation and move forward. We have it every year. It's called the All Church Charge Conference. Ours is scheduled for December 14th. So we'll be doing our usual business there, and our district superintendent will be joining us via Zoom for that. And then following that meeting, real briefly, we're going to take a straw poll of those who have gathered so that we can give some guidance to the administrative council. The process for disaffiliating starts with the administrative council taking a vote and initiating that process with the district superintendent. So to guide the leaders of our administrative council, we're going to do the straw poll. We're going to ask those who have gathered, what do you think? Would you follow the church into a new denomination? Would you be fine in the current denomination? What would you like to do? And how would you respond if the church went differently than you did, basically?
And the straw poll will be anonymous.
Yes, the straw poll will be 100% anonymous. We need to do that is because, well, twofold. First, we have to get 2/3 of the people who come to a vote. It would take a special called charge conference for, it would be actually an all-church conference, technically. So it would be a special called all-church conference to decide if we were going to disaffiliate. And it would take 2/3 of members of our church who are present and voting at that meeting to move forward with disaffiliation. Now, you might be doing a head count if we had 100 people at that. That would be 67 people. If 67 people voted, then the church could move forward with disaffiliation, but that would still leave 33 people present and voting who don't want to go in that direction. And so the vote totals will or could have an impact on the cost for the church to leave. The more overwhelming the vote goes one way or the other could affect the cost for the church if we choose to leave. So we want to discern that. We also want to discern if there is an appetite for this at all. If we decide not to, then we'll likely, through the leadership of the administrative council, find a way to affirm our staying in the UMC formally. I don't want us to just drift into one direction or another. I want us to choose. If that makes sense. But there won't be anything formal at this church conference. There will just be an anonymous straw poll.
Okay, then what's the timeline then that the vote has to be taken, and is the vote by the administrative board or a special call?
Good question. So Carol's asking about the timeline and whose vote sort of initiates all that and sets that up. So it's a two-stage process basically for voting. The administrative council votes to explore the possibility for disaffiliation, and then we would initiate that process with the district superintendent at that point. That has to be done by January 13th, according to the timeline given by our conference. So the administrative council has to initiate that discernment process by January 13th. It's not clear when our called charge conference or all church charge conference would be, but that would then follow the administrative council. So administrative council starts the process, and then that would formalize in a called all church conference where the vote would be taken. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. At that meeting, are there going to be absentee ballots, proxies?
No, our discipline does not allow for proxies or even online voting. We'll have to talk to the district superintendent about that. They're being very careful about the vote because of the significance of the subject matter and the precision of the vote needed to pass. So it will have to be full members of the church. So we have members and we have preparatory members. Those would be kids who aren't yet 18 but haven't gone through confirmation. And then we have something called constituents. Those are people who are frequent participants in our congregation but are not formally members. And if you're not sure where you live in that distinction and you want to make sure, let me know. We can figure that out. But yeah, it would be those members present and voting would make up the body that would decide. And that vote, we don't know exactly when that would be, but it would likely come in March, would be my guess if I had to ballpark it. Because then that would, if the church votes to disaffiliate, then we have to go into negotiation with the annual conference over any additional charges they might ask of us. And then we'd have to decide if, at that point, we can actually accomplish that, and we want to. And if all of that gets hammered out and we agree to a number, then that goes before the annual conference in June. So it's kind of, Ad Council has to decide by mid-January. We'll likely do a charge conference in March, I'm guessing. And then it wouldn't be formalized until annual conference in June. Yes, Carol.
We wouldn't know how much it's going to cost to go full forward until after we vote.
Right. Yes, and that's something Jeff addresses in his video. If you go back and watch it, Carol's question is we wouldn't know the final absolute cost until after the vote, and that's right. That's right. We will know the mandatory parts of that by then. So there are the discipline that paragraph 2553 spells out the required amounts. We have to pay this year's apportionments. We have to pay an additional year's apportionments, and we have to pay for unfunded pension liability. So those are required costs, but they're not capped at those. So the annual conference can impose more costs if they decide. And really, it's entirely up to them. Their process is such that that they don't start off with an automatic percentage or amount. And Jeff talks about why that is in his discussion in that video on our YouTube page in great detail. So you can verify what I'm saying by going back and watching that if you're curious. But essentially, the conference wants to be able to support what they're calling a remnant. If there is some significant portion of a congregation that votes to disaffiliate, but there's a significant minority that wants to remain in the United Methodist Church, they want to be able to support them in starting a new congregation to serve them. So back to that example, if we have 100 people at charge conference and 67 vote to leave, and that's technically enough, 33 are there and vote not to leave, then they would get in touch with those 33 and see if they have a desire to stay in the United Methodist Church. And if they do they have a desire to start a new church? And if they do, then they can come to us in that negotiation process and say, we're going to require more funds from you as you leave to support this group of people that wants to stay. Does that make sense? And they won't know if there is a remnant worthy of that conversation until after the vote. That's their logic. If that makes sense.
They would have to support, or just saying if we did go that way, then we would be supporting the ones that didn't want to go that way also.
True. And to his credit, I think he's right about this. The people who want to stay have poured their time and treasure and energy into this congregation, same as the people who want to leave. So their logic is if there's enough to leave, but there's a significant number that want to stay, then they want to be able to support them, basically. So to give you some idea, there were 6 churches that disaffiliated in October at our annual conference meeting. that were voted to disaffiliate. All of them were not charged anything above the minimum. But I think the largest church was a half-time pastorate. So we're talking about smaller churches, all of them in much more rural settings. There have not been any churches, that, for example, this size or bigger, that have gone this path yet. In fact, I don't think there's been a single one that has a full-time pastor that's gone this route yet. So it would be, we can look to that history and say, well, they haven't charged anything yet, but we could say the circumstances might change. And in fact, I just got a text from a friend of mine that heard that the Arkansas annual conference, so this is different depending on your annual conference. Our annual conference has set up the process, and you can look on the website and see that. Every annual conference has to sort of set up its own process within the guidelines of that paragraph, and some have come out swinging with 50% fair market value in addition to the required sums, making it virtually impossible for a church to leave, essentially. Some have set deadlines that have been quite difficult to meet, and making it sort of procedurally difficult, if not impossible, to leave. Others have made it extremely easy. I was looking for video information. I found a video promoting the Global Methodist Church on the YouTube page for the United Methodist Church's Texas Annual Conference. So the Texas Annual Conference was actually promoting the Global Methodist Church, which is weird. I'll just say it's weird. But that's where a lot of Texas churches have left. A lot of Texas churches in that conference have chosen to leave. So there's a larger point. And there are some whole conferences that had sought to leave, but have been barred because of the current discipline. So we're in a different situation where traditional churches that might leave could number in the single digits by the time it's all done. We could have 10 or maybe ambitious might be 15 in our conference of the 350 plus churches in the conference. So I do think the majority is probably going to stay with the United Methodist Church. Karen.
Yes, I understand that there are a couple of foundations that have large amounts of money that will be used to make low interest loans to churches that want to disaffiliate and need loans in order to do so. I believe one of those foundations is the Global Methodist Church that has some low interest money available.
Yeah. So Karen's asking about basically how would we fund the cost of leaving if we want it, and she has heard of foundations that are offering low interest loans to churches that would like to disaffiliate. I'm not familiar with the Global Methodist Church Fund. We have a local foundation that is associated. They're is that the right word? Associated with, but not. They're not associated. Okay. We have a local foundation here that used to be called the Rocky Mountain Foundation, or the Rocky Mountain Conference Foundation, whatever. It's now Methodists Helping Methodists. They changed their name intentionally because they are separate from the United Methodist Church. We currently, full disclosure, we currently have our mortgage through the foundation, the Methodist Helping Methodist Foundation. We also have Mickey Haas, our administrative council chair, sits on the board, as well as another friend of mine, Dave Heaster, who pastors in Colorado Springs, are both on the board of our foundation. And they have come out and said that they are willing and able to make those low interest loans.
It's market rate.
Market rate, yeah, not low interest. They're market rate loans to churches to be able to finance their living out.
Well, I would say we need to also, if we want to go that direction, we need to also look at the Global Methodist Church, because what I read indicated they have some $100 million.
Okay. I had not heard that.
They have available for loan.
Is that a foundation through the global?
Yes. Yes.
So
As
kind of
I understand it.
So kind of the way the process would work is, like I said, administrative council would initiate it. We would reach out to the district superintendent, let him know we're considering this. We need to schedule an all-church conference. But then we have to go into a process where we start remitting reports to the annual conference about our finances, about our membership, etc. And it's during that time that we would really begin to explore in earnest all of the possibilities. We have a fantastic finance team and wonderful leadership here that would dive into all of those details so that by the time we took our vote, we would know as much as possible about the cost and how probable that would be. Again, we won't know the whole cost until afterwards, but we'll cross that road when we get there. But we'll start doing that due diligence. So if you have information or you read information about that, you can funnel that to me and I can get that to our team so that they can be, we can do our due diligence on that for sure. But I had not heard of that. Yeah, Carol.
Before it gets to that point, I don't know if we have demographic information about giving at this church or not, but I know if you look around here, we have a lot of older people in the congregation. So will our income stream remain as strong as what it is now?
That's a good question. Carol's asking about our income stream if we choose to go in a different direction. We do have pledges and we have information on people's giving. I do not have any idea myself, and that's intentional. But we do have a financial secretary, Lisa, our financial secretary. She's our staff member who acts as our financial secretary. She logs all of the giving and assigns it. So when you get your end of year giving report, it's because Lisa has gone in every week that you've given and indicated in your computer file with our system and tracked your giving so that we can give you that report at the end of the year. So we have people's giving, and we obviously won't know unless people tell us where they are and what they would do should we stay or go. I will say that just in conversations that I've had with people, there are people who would leave if we stayed, and there are people who have indicated they would probably leave if we go. So I think trying to keep everybody here is probably impractical. Just in reality, it hurts and it's not fun and it's not a happy thing to talk about, but it's true. So the question is which one will impact, how will wherever we go impact us financially, and we don't really know that. We can assume that it will have some impact for sure, but we don't know for sure what that will be. But we do have a lot of information we could find out pretty quickly if we needed to. Yeah, Kathy.
At this point, there's no ballpark, and at one time you heard about 300,000 or something like that.
So question about cost. We don't have a firm number, and partly that's because of that unfunded pension liability piece. If you're familiar with pensions, if you have a pension, or if you're familiar with this at all, basically churches and clergy have been paying into that system for decades at this point, and when they retire, they're paid out of that same system. But if we had to pay every penny owed to every pastor, we would be in the red, essentially. That makes sense, right? So there's a portion of our pension fund that has responsibility for payments, potential payments to pastors that is not currently funded by dollars in a bank account somewhere. So the group that handles our pension program, Westpath is the name of the agency in the United Methodist Church. They invest, and they do very, very well, honestly. They invest those funds to grow them, which means that the unfunded pension liability has a lot to do with the state of the market. Now, you might have been thinking, that doesn't sound very good, given the current state of things. The general wisdom was, as the market goes up, our portion of the unfunded pension liability would go down. And as the market goes down, our portion of that unfunded pension liability would go up. Make sense? That was the general wisdom, but there's been recent analysis that actually there's been some other market forces that are helping us, helping that number sort of offset, and that is the raising interest rates, which sucks if you're trying to get a car or buy a house, but it means a lot if you're trying to get returns on a pension program. And so as their interest rates go up, the yields go up, and so it's balancing out a little bit. But because of the market volatility and that sort of unknown nature of that number at any given time, the conference will request from Westpath quarterly, I think. They'll probably request one more time, I imagine, probably just before the annual conference for all the churches that go through this next cycle. So they'll probably request it here after the new year. And Westpath will give the conference its number, and the conference has decided how they're going to apportion that number to individual churches. And that number is based on the last 3 years of your clergy's compensation. So that's why me being a full-time pastor here is different, impacts our number more than if, say, a church that has had a quarter-time pastor for the last decade. Their share is much smaller. A friend of mine, Randy Jessen, pastors the church in Genoa. He's a retired pastor, and he's been a quarter-time at Genoa for the last 4 years. And before that, I don't even know if they had a pastor before that. So a quarter-time gets about $14,000 a year in compensation. And mine is, I think, somewhere with housing is somewhere in the neighborhood of like 60 or 76 or 78 this year. So it's the average of those 3 years, and then that they put that over and against all of the compensations for all of the clergy in the whole conference, and they decide from that basically how much. So a church that has a full-time pastor for the last 3 years will pay more than the churches that have disaffiliated so far. So we can kind of know that number, but even that has some market volatility. The last time we got an estimate from the conference, it was in the $225,000 to $250,000 range, all together. So that would be and there's one extra piece that the conference is imposing that's related to unfunded pension liability. There's unfunded pension, there's apportionments, which we've kept up on, and then there's retiree benefit that's guaranteed to all clergy in the Mountain Sky Conference. The Mountain Sky Conference for decades has guaranteed a supplement for Medicare. So they pay for a Medicare supplement for retired clergy. And because that is also guaranteed to every pastor, including me, even if we leave, I could come back because my pension will still be half in the UMC if we were to go to the GMC. I could come back to them and say, yeah, you promised me for 17 years that I would get this Medicare supplement. So there's liabilities there as well. So we pay a portion of that as well. So that's how we get to that rough estimate. Right now, so it's $36,000-ish for apportionments. We owe, basically we're making payments as we go every month so far. So it'd be about $36,000 for that, in addition to keeping up on our payments. And then there would be the unfunded pension liability and retiree benefit piece. And both of those are market driven. So there's nothing required for building. At this point, that's that piece that would be negotiated after the vote. Yeah. If after the vote they determine that there's a need to support a remnant, then they would ask for some percentage of the building. Some other provisions that they're throwing in are probably less concerning to us, but would include things like guarantees that the church would remain a worshiping congregation for a 10-year period or something. They've put in some provisions like that, because there have been some churches who have been sort of on the verge of closing, and if a United Methodist Church closes, then the building and assets are turned over to the conference trustees, and the conference trustees sells and uses those funds to support new ministries elsewhere. So there were some churches that were suspected, about to close their doors, and the members were trying to get out of the UMC so that they could then sell the property and keep the money themselves, as opposed to remitting it to the UMC. So they were putting in some provisions for some struggling churches that they, if at any point in that first 10 years they stopped being a worshiping congregation, then a portion of the sale of the building would come back to the UMC, if that makes sense. But that would mean you'd be betting against yourself surviving 10 years, and I'm convinced that's not going to happen. But so those are some other things, but financially those are the pieces. So we'll know we'll know an estimate of that amount. It's how much more they might charge us based on our vote and their evaluation of potential ministry here in Brighton. Yeah, Mel.
What's the path like for pastors to make their decision what they want to do?
Okay, Mel's asking about the path for pastors. What's that process look like? That process is a little simpler. I only have to take one vote, and only one vote counts. So, well, my wife counts too, I suppose. So at least 2 votes count. But essentially, right now, as the church remains in the UMC, I remain in the UMC. If you all decide you want to go to the GMC, then I would have to make a decision about whether I wanted to follow you to the GMC. So that would be a relatively easy thing. The process is a little confusing, but even to our own Board of Order Ministry, who doesn't seem to know what they're doing sometimes. Not a huge shock, but there's a way. You don't surrender your credentials as a pastor. You seek to transfer your ordination to the new denomination. And so I will always have started off as a ordained in the UMC, and that credential would then just be transferred at my request to the GMC. And then the GMC has a way of formally recognizing my ordination and ratifying that. So it's fairly simple. When it comes to things like, some people have asked about pension and benefits and that sort of thing, Westpath has already set up pension and health benefit programs for the GMC. So they've already rolled that out. And essentially what it would do is I would cease contributing to my UMC pension, and I would start in a new Global Methodist Church pension. So there wouldn't be any disruption other than I'd have 2 pension pots that I'd be drawing from at retirement instead of 1. So it's a fairly simple thing for pastors. The real tricky part is if a pastor decides to go but doesn't have a church, there's going to be no guaranteed appointment in the GMC. So you have to go find your own place, and there might not be churches that are in need of pastors immediately. On the flip side, if a church were to leave and the pastor wanted to stay in the GMC or in the UMC, then there would be a need to find a pastor to serve. So the other potential could be that you all vote to stay in the UMC, and then I would have a decision to make: is that something I can do long term? But it's independent, and that's intentional. So, for example, when it comes time to vote at that all-church conference, I do not get a vote. I absolutely do not get a vote. I am not a member of this congregation. I am technically a member of the Mountain Sky Conference as an ordained clergy person. So I don't get a vote. This is all your decision. The church needs to decide where they're going to go, and that decision is going to be more important to you all much longer than it will be to me, no matter what. Because eventually I'm not going to be the pastor of this church at some point. Hopefully not in the near future, but at some point. So that, I don't know if that answers your question or if there are any follow-ups there. Okay. But I won't make any move until this congregation makes its decision.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Because honestly, making the decision based on the current pastor is the wrong way to make that decision. For sure. Yeah, you need to make this decision.
You don't have any time frame. You could make your decision, or a pastor could make a decision such as this at any time.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. They don't own my house, so I don't have to worry about that. So yeah. It's a simpler process for clergy to move than it is for churches. Other questions? Let me check online real quick, make sure we don't have somebody onlining us here. Bob Dexter with a question. What about an option to leave the UMC and join a sister Wesleyan denomination, Wesleyan Free Methodist Church? That's from Bob Dexter, watching from home. That would be a possibility too. We don't have to go to the Global Methodist Church if you decide to leave the United Methodist Church. Like I said, you don't have to go anywhere. Honestly, you could vote to be independent. I would recommend against that, but that's a possibility, and that would be a part of the discernment process. I don't know as much about the Wesleyan Church or the Free Methodist churches, other than that they tend to be a little more sort of generic evangelical and a little less connected to their Wesleyan roots, strangely enough. But the Wesleyan and Free Methodist churches were early breakaways from the Methodist Episcopal Church, as were the Nazarene Church and the Church of the Assemblies of God, and a handful of others. So there are lots of other denominations out there. What's that?
Even the Salvation Army.
Yeah, even the Salvation Army was started by Methodists. So there you go. Go donate to those bell ringing, bucket carrying folk. So yeah, those would be options. And I honestly don't know what it would take to move into one of those denominations, or if they're preparing for an influx of Methodist churches. But I'm sure that would be a possibility. There's AME churches here in Denver. That's the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which was an early breakaway from the Methodist Church. So there are other denominations too that could be possibilities. And that would be all part of a post-exit discernment. Those are sort of separate decisions, honestly. You can't decide to be a part of the GMC unless you decide to disaffiliate from the UMC, but to decide disaffiliation is not an automatic to the GMC or some other denomination. That would be a follow-up discernment process. I can't confirm that answered Bob's question, but hopefully we got to it. Any other questions? I know we're vomiting a lot of information at you, fire hose style, in the last couple of weeks. So I want to encourage you to take advantage of these smaller groups that we're going to be putting together. Those will be much less formal opportunities for you to just sort of process and discuss and get a sense of where other people are and kind of chew about this outside the presence of the pastor. I know that can be kind of intimidating for some people. So take advantage of those. Those will be, I think, a huge asset to not only ask other questions that maybe come up for you as you think about this or as you digest some of this information, but also just to sort of process, what you're thinking and feeling about the process in preparation for that straw poll. So, and by the way, if you're unable to attend the Charge Conference in December, where we're going to take the straw poll, but you want your voice heard, you can always let us know. You can let us know anonymously if you want. You can drop us a note at the church here, kind of what you're thinking. If you want that to be considered by our administrative council, the straw poll is not going to be as tightly rigid in its format. So there will be opportunities to give feedback. We want to get the feedback from the congregation so that the decision of the administrative council can move forward in a reflection of what the congregation wants to do. The last thing we want to do is call for a vote and then just barely get across the finish line for a disaffiliation, or think that that's where everybody wants to go and then have it turn out to not be the case. And then we've had a vote that we didn't need to take. Voting is by nature divisive. I don't know if you've noticed that. But voting it creates camps of winners and losers, and I hate it. I really do. I wish there was a better way to make decisions, but unfortunately, it's what is the quote? Democracy is the worst form of decision making, except for all the others, right? It's just we can't make a decision unless we vote, but voting is inherently fraught with all kinds of emotions and conflict and just all kinds of things. So obviously we'd prefer not to have to do this, but I think we need to make a decision about where we want to go. Like we talked about last week, we could drift into the UMC and just float along and then wake up in a denomination that's very different than it is today, and then wonder what happened. I want us to be able to make the decision, do we want to go in that direction? And if we do, then let's embrace it. And if we want to go in another direction, then let's do that and embrace that. But let's make a decision and do it intentionally. Let's live life on purpose as a congregation. That's kind of my call to you all. Is it's always better to it's always better to decide than it is to drift. So we'll decide, and we're going to continue to love each other in the midst of that decision-making process, and no matter how anybody votes, and irrelevant. We're all children of God, and we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, and we'll do our best to move forward in that way.
And the sign-up sheets, you'll have them available at church next Sunday also?
Yes, we'll have those at church next week. They'll also be, the church is going to be closed, so that's not going to do you any good.
And Sunday, yeah.
We'll have them here Sunday, and then they'll be available throughout the week as they come up at the office. You can always call me or text me or email me, and I can sign you up for one of those if you want, or if you have questions about when and where those will be. To give you some idea, let's see, John, you guys are doing Monday? Yeah, John and his wife are hosting Monday. The Freedhomes are hosting Wednesday. Jim and Karen Lawler are going to be hosting Saturday afternoon, and then Mickey is going to be hosting the one here at the church on Friday. So those are our leaders that will be hosting.
I live in Northern Commerce City.
Yeah, so we got Brighton for the Freedhomes, Northern Commerce City for John. Karen and Jim live off of Riverdale Road on the west side of Brighton, and of course the church, you know where that is. You found us, so.
You got address?
We'll send you a pin. We'll send it the bat signal so you can find us. I also want to extend another invitation. If anybody would like to come and speak to me privately, or would like to speak to any of our leaders privately, if you're intimidated by me and you want more information, but you're not comfortable in a big group and you want to talk through some of this, reach out to us. You can reach out to me and set up a time. We can visit. I'm glad. This is probably the most significant decision this church has made in decades. And so it's important that, and my goal, my dedication to you all is to make sure that you're as well informed and as fairly informed as possible. I want you guys to make an informed decision, whatever that is. So if you have questions, you want more information, don't feel like you're bothering me. This is significant for the life of our church. Give me a call, send me an email, and I will set up time to visit with you. Even if we have to do it, we can do it on Zoom. For online folks, we can do it in person, do it over the phone, whatever's more comfortable for you. But I want to help you understand. Yes, John?
You said that meeting was December the 13th?
December the 14th. Yeah. Our regular charge conference is going to be December the 14th. There's going to be a meal. I believe we're going to have a rousing edition of Steve-Burr spaghetti. Should be delicious. Bill's cooking up a spaghetti dinner for us, so we're going to meet in Fellowship Hall, and we'll Zoom in. There'll be a Zoom option because we're Zooming in our district superintendent. So if others need to Zoom in, that'll be the 14th, and that'll be, like I said, that's our annual meeting where we're just going to talk about the future of the church and make some important annual decisions, but we'll also take that straw poll there. So. Any other questions? Good of the order. Well, I thank you so much for your attentiveness and your questions, and please keep them coming. Reach out if you have any need. I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving. You can have lots of turkey, get some amnesia, not think about this for a few days, and look forward to seeing you at the end. All right, bye online people. Thank you so much for joining us.